Everything that we've been told about sport performance, no pain, no gain. That's not really what we're finding out. The pain is actually there for a reason. And so we can go at a much lower level and we can have these positive effects.
Hey y'all, I'm Ryan Devlin and welcome back to The Struggle. I'm so psyched you're here for this special that we're doing today. It's a special conversation with Emil Abrahamsson and Dr. Keith Baar. You all know Emil. He's been a guest on our show. He's also a mega star on YouTube. He's an incredibly strong climber in the gym and out on rock, and had that great interview with him last year, and now he is back, but he's trading his shoes and his chalk for a white lab coat because we are sitting down with Dr. Keith Baar of UC Davis. He's an incredibly smart guy working in the world of connective tissue. And he was the one who originally did a paper about how tendons might respond favorably to light loading that Emil famously based his no-hang protocol off of, that he and his brother did, and which just exploded on YouTube when he actually put the theories that Keith put down in that paper to the test by doing these really light no-hang protocols, what we refer to in this conversation as Abra-hangs, where it's very light loading for like 10 minutes once or twice a day. And then, as I'm sure you've seen in the video that Emil did, the results were off the charts, not just with regard to how good he felt in his health, but also measurable results with regard to a massive jump in how much he could max hang. And he was not doing max hangs, he was just doing the no hangs. So that was kind of the N=1 experiment that Emil did, and we talked a lot about that in our prior conversation. But what's new here? Well, what's new is the science behind actually trying to see if what happened to Emil is what would happen to other climbers. These guys teamed up and dove into data, like hundreds of thousands of points of data through the Crimped app. And in doing so, they were able to retroactively, I think was the actual scientific term, look at climbers who had done the no-hang protocol, who have done max hang protocols, and who have done nothing at all, and actually see what the impact was on these Abra-hangs, these very lightweight 10 minutes a day or twice a day no-hangs, if you will, like feet on the ground, and what that meant for their max hang performance. And I was just blown away by what they learned in doing this study together. I mean, it's just crazy. I'm going to let it unfold here because it's helpful to understand the methodology, as well as what they were testing, how they were looking at the data, and then what the results mean for us climbers on how we might be able to stay healthier and get stronger without adding a whole lot of load to our weekly training. So without further ado, let's toss on our white lab coats and geek out with Emil Abrahamsson and Dr. Keith Baar. I'm really excited for this chat, you guys, and again, very grateful for your time. Dr. Baar, do you prefer Dr. Baar? Do you prefer Keith?
I prefer Keith.
Okay, very good. I prefer Dr. Ryan. I haven't earned it, though, so I won't force you guys to call me it. Well, let's just dive in, and I know very little about this study that you all conducted under a cloak of mystery over the past year. It seems like I was speaking with our mutual friend Peter over at Crimped about something totally unrelated, and he said, hey, you should reach out to Emil and Keith and have a conversation. I'm not going to tell you much more than that. So here we are having this conversation. Emil, could you tee up what you all were kind of setting out to do? What was the provenance? Where did the idea for this study come from? And then we can hand it over to Keith to maybe talk about how we then got that implemented.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I think I'll take it from the top with where it all began, the no-hangs that I presented a protocol of back in 2021. And basically, it is a very low-intensity hangboard protocol that consists of 10 minutes of daily hanging, 2 times per day. So I would load my fingers with around 40% of my maximum load. So very, very low compared to what I could lift. So I can do that, completely cold if I want to, or with a very light warm-up and still feel perfectly fine. And I did that for around 30 days at first. and tracked my progress in finger strength and finger health and kind of how I felt doing it. You know, it was a one-person study and just a little YouTube analysis, so very unprofessional and not very research-based. But it gave me some results that were completely fascinating, especially at the time, because it didn't seem like many people had tried that type of training method before. And I saw these, I don't want to get into the numbers, but they were just bizarre in terms of how much I increased my finger strength. And it sparked quite a bit of interest online. So a lot of people have partly tried the protocol, despite me encouraging them not to, without more research behind this. But also, I've seen a bunch of other YouTubers try it as well, and people, you know, all across the globe checking it out. And there are a lot of interesting results behind it. So people getting stronger fingers, despite it not being the conventional max hangs or heavy loaded training. And we can get into why that is in a little while, I think. But basically, we're not necessarily just trying to strengthen our muscles. We're trying to work with our connective tissues and work through everything, which is a little bit different than doing like a one max deadlift and just trying to get stronger at that, which obviously has a lot of research behind it already. The long story short is that I don't think climbing has been extremely researched, so to speak. There isn't that extensive piece of information regarding how we train our fingers in the best way possible. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence. I mean, mine was one. Max hangs in general are quite proven to be effective for improving finger strength. But it is interesting to reflect on, are there more ways to do it? Can we do something different to, well, do it in a more healthy manner or a more effective manner? And that's what we wanted to look at, essentially.
Yeah, so cool. I mean, I've seen the video, the no-hang video that you did, and you also did a follow-up to it, of course. And I think most climbers, most people listening to this right now will have seen that video. Virality is a term that is thrown around, you know, quite loosely these days, but one that certainly applies to that video. It really caught fire in the climbing world. And I remember seeing it and I was like, well, I'm going to do that because it's just so easy. It wasn't adding a lot of time or training load. It was an easy thing to just kind of keep my feet on the floor and sag into the holds for a little bit, you know, while I was on a phone call or something for 10 minutes. And you were very clear to say, hey, this is N=1. But how do you not get psyched when you see the result of what that was for you, where you were maxing out way beyond anything that you had done prior to doing that protocol? And I think that's why it really took the climbing community by storm, because it seemed like this unconventional way. One wouldn't think you were going to level up top end PR numbers for hangs when you're doing such light hangs throughout. And that was rooted, if I recall, and it's been a while since I've seen that original one, but I think you had read a study about the way connective tissue works or could be loaded. I think you and your brother had talked about that to some extent, and then you were implementing some of those concepts into what you did. And Keith, this is probably a good opportunity for us to introduce you and maybe have you speak to some of the science or some of what was known that Emil originally had based that on. And if you could, Keith, maybe as part of, by way of answering that question, maybe just introduce yourself and your background a little bit here. I jumped right in because I was so psyched to talk about this thing and I forgot to do a proper introduction. So my apologies.
No worries. So I'm Keith Baar. I'm a professor of what we call molecular exercise physiology at the University of California, Davis. And basically what the title means is that what we try and do is we try and find the small molecules within our cells that are important for our cells' response to exercise, nutrition, age, disease, all of these different types of things that allow us to get better over time. And we use a bunch of different ways of trying to discover these things. And one of the things that we've used is we've used these little engineered ligaments that we make. So we make these little ligaments in a dish that are made from human ACLs that people rupture. We get the remnant that comes out during surgery. We isolate the cells and then we grow those cells up. We can make little ligaments. And one of the things that we had discovered a number of years ago was that when we do loading on the ligaments, if we want to make them stronger, if we want to make them have more collagen, we went through a series of experiments trying to figure out what it is that our ligaments and tendons respond to it in a way that makes them bigger and stronger. And what we found is that it didn't matter if we did like really long or really heavy loads, or it didn't matter if we did lots of frequent loads like running versus walking, no difference. It didn't matter whether we did a really heavy load or a really light load. It didn't really make a difference. What mattered was time. So we start to do the exercise, our cells get turned on, and then they're going to turn off within 10 minutes of starting the exercise. And so what that tells us about it is, I always give the analogy to my students of my daughter. My daughter's now 17. She's going to listen to me for a couple of minutes, and then she's going to tune me out. Cells are doing the same thing. They're going to listen to a message for a short period of time, and then they're going to tune you out. When you're going to go out and you're going to climb for extended periods of time, 2, 3, 4 hours, what you're getting is you're getting a signal into the cells that are within our tendons and ligament, or tendons with and our pulleys within our fingers. And that's the signal goes up for about 10 minutes. And then as you keep climbing, the signal to adapt goes down, but you're still getting all of the loads that are causing fatigue. And the fatigue is basically what's going to eventually cause some of the little bits of collagen to break, and you're going to get weakness. And so what we figured out was this idea of that 10-minute load was optimized to get maximal signal with minimal fatigue, minimal breakdown of the tissue. And so the idea is that if you load for this kind of 5 to 10 minute period, that's great for our connective tissues, our tendons, ligaments, cartilage, and bones. And so what we had done is we put together this paper. We said, here's how we would exercise if we were only really interested in improving the tendons, ligaments, and other connective tissues. And that's where the Abrahamssons took it up, and they started trying it themselves and coming up with a program that was specific for rock climbers. And that's where this all really became into a real life program to improve performance.
Are you a climber, Keith?
No. My PhD student, Natalie, who's the one who's been doing all of the heavy lifting on the paper, she's a climber. I think she chose my lab because of Emil's video. She had heard of my lab. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I got a very good PhD student. So thanks for that, Emil.
Yeah. And so what was your reaction when you saw that first film that Emil put out, having tried that no-hang protocol for a while?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I thought it was exactly what we had proposed would work. And so it's always good. You do science, and it's always like very specific things. Oh, it's a little thing in a dish and nobody applies it. But then when you see it that it actually works, it's really, really satisfying. It's very satisfying. And so we knew that the kind of longer holds are really good for tendinopathies. So we had lots of experience with that. We've done some work with NBA players who've had patellar tendinopathies or jumpers. We were able to fix those things. So we knew that there was some practical application to improving kind of damaged tissues. But Emil's work was the first one that kind of said that this could actually improve healthy tissue as well.
It really is fascinating, and I can't wait to dig into this current study that you all did. But let's continue to work our way towards present. And I'm curious, Keith, the complications or the potential, I don't know, signal to noise ratio when it goes from studying something in a petri dish to then like real world application, like what Emil did and what many of us, thousands of us climbers did after, seeing that first video that he put out. Why not study in your lab the human applications of some of these concepts?
So we do study the human applications. We just don't have kind of the capacity to do all of them. So as we start getting into tendon and functionality, well, 70% of all the reasons why athletes don't train or don't play is because of tendon-related injuries.
Wow.
And so when you have a number that big, and then you have a bunch of sports that the monetary component is extremely high, you get pulled in those directions because people in baseball are trying to figure out why the ulnar collateral ligament is rupturing. People in soccer are trying to figure out why the hamstring. All of those things pull you in different directions. And so, again, as you guys know as climbers, on the pecking order, it's not necessarily towards the top of the kind of monetary. Even when it's an Olympic sport now, it's still like, oh, climbing, Olympic sport. It's not necessarily household names. And so again, the pull for, people to bring you in and look at things is going to be different. So we had spent a lot of time like I said, with NBA, with some of the professional football or soccer teams, professional American football teams. There's a lot of application there. Rugby, we've got a number of papers in rugby and return to play. And so we've done a lot of human application. Most of it is in the injury recovery space. Mm-hmm. We hadn't done anything strictly in the training space yet. And that's why we were really interested in trying to get something where we could actually quantify the types of things that I was seeing in all the comments under Emil's YouTube videos where everybody's going on and on. I wanted to try and quantify that in a way beyond just the bias of everybody who has success is going to rate some great message under his video. I wanted to know if that was real or if that was just because we had selected out a bunch of people who really liked it.
Right. No, that's great. And that helps us to bring things current so we can dive into this research and the study that you all did together. Yeah, to your point about the pecking order of climbing, I think probably one, game salary for one NBA player dwarfs all of the World Cup purses for probably a decade of climbing, unfortunately, but trending in the right direction. And at one point in time, golfers didn't make anything, and now it's one of the highest paid sports. So I think all of us who are listening right now hope that climbing continues to move up the pecking order and these athletes get paid the money that they deserve as the elite performers that they are. And speaking of elite athletes, Emil, I'll come back over to you here. That was quite some time ago that you did that first no-hang protocol and video. Can you tell me just between then and today, or when you and Keith kicked off this study, how were you continuing to work those no-hangs into your routine, if at all, as well as max hangs and everything else? Having seen the results that you did it become a staple part of your routine?
I've kept it into my routine quite strictly, I would say. Nowadays, I do it once per day guaranteed. Mm-hmm. Like I try to make sure I always do it in the morning. So I'll have a little morning walk, grab some fresh air. And then as soon as I get back before breakfast, I'll do my no-hangs. And that I try to stick to as basically every single day with a few outliers. Sure. 2 times per day is not necessarily something I get done all the time. That's usually on rest days. I'll do it 2 times. But if I have a climbing session, 6 hours after I do my morning hangs, I'll usually start the session with the no hangs and then begin activity. So it becomes like a second session of it, but it's not as strict as when I did the original testing.
Sure.
And I think I wouldn't mind doing it more, but it is, as with all routines, you need to make sure you do it. One of the most important parts are that you make sure that it works with your schedule and your activity. And for me, that can sometimes, if I force myself to do it 2 times per day, occasionally it means I'm delaying dinner or going to bed a little bit later than I intended to, or I maybe activate myself a little bit too late in the evening, which isn't always great if you're trying to fall asleep. So it's more from a practical perspective that I do it once per day religiously. And then, yeah, I think it's still beneficial to do it 2 times, but again, it's not always the most practical thing to include into your schedule.
Right.
So I have at times stopped doing it just to see what happens. And well, the big long-term effects that I would reflect on is that it keeps my fingers healthy, for sure. That's the biggest component. And it's without failure for the past 3 years. It is my go-to routine to recover my fingers if they're feeling tweaky or if I'm having any issues. The strength component is also there, but in a different way. It's not like I've been able to continuously improve 2,600% hang time on an edge. That would be bizarre. That definitely came from the first 30 days, and then it's been kind of kept at that level. But my biggest ambition with the protocol is to make sure that my fingers are activated as often as possible and ready for use when I want to go climbing, and to make sure that they're fired up, essentially. And I definitely continue to see that effect from doing it.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's dive into then how you were seeking to shine some light on those pretty dramatic results. And again, anecdotally, not just with yourself, but with many other climbers, as Keith, you mentioned in the comments there, people were implementing this protocol or something along the lines of it. And there seemed to be quite a bit of an effect for a lot of climbers out there. There might be some bias, to your point, on those who are leaving comments and those who are not. So as a good scientist, you decided that you needed to put a more regimented look at this. And so how did this come about? Whose idea was it? Because it's been some years since the no-hang video came out. How did this most recent study come about?
Like about a year ago, I went in through Emil's YouTube site. I found an email for him and I emailed him and said, there used to be a Reddit link with a bunch of people who said, oh, put your results here. And I was just trying to find it. So I emailed them and I said, do you have any idea as to whether anybody has kept that kind of, there was supposed to be a Google sheet somewhere out in the ether. And I was kind of curious about that. And so I had emailed him to say, what do you think about this? And we could do something really interesting here. We could do something where we actually get from what you describe very rightly in your YouTube video as it's an NF2, because he was the second one to do the protocol. And so it was basically, I was emailing him to say, how can we get the people necessary so that we could take it from an NF2 to something that we could actually make some conclusions about?
Yeah, and from there, earlier that year, I'd made the second video, the sequel to the first one, where I'd been doing it for 2 years, and I was reflecting on what the effects of that were. Technically, my brother had been doing it for 2 years straight, and I had my time off at times, and then basically I was interviewing a physiotherapist about this and asking, like, are the effects reasonable, or what does this mean? How do we view this? And within that video, it was sponsored by Crimped, and we had put the protocol into the Crimped app, which, for those who don't know, is an application used for training within climbing. So the protocol got implemented into that application, and people started doing it. And quite a lot of people started doing it. So by the time that Keith and I began talking, I think there were around 150,000 entries of the protocol into the app, which is where all the data is based off of. Because obviously a lot of these people have been doing max hangs. Some of the people have only been doing the no hangs, and a lot of them have been doing some sort of strength testing in between. And that's what we started to look at, to be able to gather data.
So you had this wealth of data basically just sitting there. I'm sure it would take years and quite a bit of money to put together a study that would cover that many climbers in that time span. We're talking 150,000 is a huge number. I'm not an expert on how studies should be run with controls and tests. I mean, you hear about this kind of thing, but Keith, could you walk us through that sample set that you had, or just kind of that treasure trove of information that was made available through Crimped, and then how you were able to start looking at those results? And also, do you enter into something like this with a hypothesis that you're trying to test?
Yeah, so those are all great questions. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to get an idea, just a rough idea. So a lot of times what we have to do is we have to, as scientists, what we try and understand is we try and understand what's called an effect size. And so what that effect size is needed so that you can put together groups of the appropriate size so that you have the power to make conclusions. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways that you do that is you do some sort of preliminary study, or you look retrospectively at data that exists. When you do something like a retrospective study, what that means is you go backwards in time and you look at people who had accumulated a bunch of data, but we didn't really control for anything. And so what we did with Peter's help from Crimped is he went back and he said, okay, all we were doing was we were looking for people who did 2 strength tests that were separated by at least 30 days. But what we found is that the people who didn't do any hangboard training, whether max hangs or no hangs or any combination, it took them a lot longer to do those 2 strength tests. So we had to increase the window of strength tests to 16 weeks so that we had enough control climbers. Most of the people who did either the no hangs or the max hangs or the combination, they would have done, say, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So we had, then when we went retrospectively, Peter put together little thresholds where you could say, okay, let's see people who've done two strength tests within a certain amount of time. And then what he did is he looked to say, okay, who's just been climbing, hasn't been doing any hangboarding, maybe small amounts of hangboard, but not enough to really make a difference. So we put a threshold at say 3 times a week for no hangs and maybe once to twice a week for the max hangs. And so what you're then able to do is you've got a group of people who are just climbing all the time, and then they took 2 strength measures of their grip strength, and they just did, max hang there, where they would do a max hold for, I think it's 5 to 7 seconds. Okay. So now we've got our control group retrospectively. And then what we can do is we can go and say, okay, how many people did just no hangs? So that means they didn't do maximum hangs more than once or twice a week, but they did the no hangs at least, say, 5 times a week, 3 to 5 times a week. Okay. Then you've got a group that only did the max hangs, maybe did 1 or 2 no hangs, but really focused on the max hangs. And then we had a 4th group, which was that they did both of them. They did both max hangs and no hangs at a sufficient quantity. And so what we were doing is just going back and seeing how many people we could get in those groups. And in total, we get about 100 people per group, about 600 climbers total. And now what we can do is we can say, okay, if in a retrospective thing where we have no idea why did they pick the group that they went into, why, what was their goal? Were they all trying to get stronger, or were some of them trying to get healthier? We have no idea going back into it because it's retrospective. We didn't assign them to a group randomly. And so there could be bias in there. So it's not perfect. But what we do is we get an idea as to what's the effect size, and how much did they improve in strength? And so that's what we did is we went back and we put together, we just basically grouped all of the individual climbers. And once we had those groups, then we can actually make some analyses and try and figure out, what's the effect of all of those different types of training.
Okay, great. Let's pause there so I can just wrap my non-doctor head around it. Just so we've got 4 groups. There's a group where people just climbed, for the most part, right? So we're kind of like, there's maybe some random like trainings here and there, but I'm just going to generalize for the sake of conversation here. So we had a group where people just climbed. We had a group where people did the no hangs predominantly, but didn't do max hangs or anything else. We had a group where people were predominant and still did climb. So for all of these,
all the groups were still climbing.
Yes, I think that's a good clarification to make. So everyone was climbing. We don't know exactly like what style or where or how much, whatever, but like it was in the gym, it was outside, it was sport climbing, it was bouldering, but they're all climbing. So we have everybody climbing. One group was just climbing and not doing any sort of training interventions that they were logging in crimped. One group was climbing and their training interventions on their finger training were heavily focused on the no hangs and not on max hangs. The third group was heavily focused on max hangs and not heavily focused or very much on the no hangs at all. And then the fourth group was a mix of doing the no hang protocol as well as some max hangs. All of them were climbing, and then all of them tested their max hang at a point A in time, and then again at a point B in time, where they were doing this kind of training and climbing in between. So we had 4 groups that you focused on, and I'm assuming this was happening it's kind of asynchronously, because this was not as you said, it's a kind of a retroactive. So this was happening at different times, but none of that really matters if you have enough people, right? So you're saying 100 in each group is enough to try to smooth out some of the wild kind of outliers and that kind of thing?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. I think I'm understanding. I think I'm following. This is great. And then the theory that you were trying to test, or the what you were trying to determine was one of these protocols that one of these 4 groups was doing resulting in a higher improvement in max hang results in terms of a percentage, I'm assuming, of what they had hung on point A and then point B.
Exactly.
Okay. And did you have a theory going in? Emil, I'll ask you first. Before it's getting the results of this, did you have a theory going in on which group may or may not see the best improvement?
Well, a theory, yes, I would say. Very loosely based on my own experience of it. So obviously I was expecting the no-hang protocol to give some sort of results. And I was expecting that if you don't train your fingers, you're probably not going to get way stronger fingers. So those were the main theories. And we decided to use the max hangs because it's sort of the golden standard in finger training for max hangs to get stronger fingers. Obviously, you can do stuff like repeaters and other exercises, but I would say generally max-hangs is the one that people go to for improving their finger strength.
Right. And this was just to clear, I think that's an important point. This was a focus on improvement on finger strength, not on capacity, not on endurance, like critical force and these kinds of things.
Exactly. It was focused on improving your max strength. So we weren't looking at finger health in the same way because we couldn't retrospectively. So yes, the strength component is what we were looking at. And we got some very interesting results.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just going to tease the audience further. Let's not get the results just yet. Let's string them along for another couple of minutes here because I'm enjoying this. I'm drunk with power over here. Keith, how about you? So Emil was thinking the group that just climbed and didn't log any sort of training would likely not see much improvement in overall finger strength. And the group that did the no-hangs, he theorized based on his own experience, there would be an improvement there. Did you have a theory going in? Are you allowed to have a theory going in, or does that bias the study?
Well, I absolutely have a theory because that's what the hypothesis is, right? The hypothesis is just a fancy word for a guess as to what's going to happen. It's a guess that can be answered with a yes or no. So absolutely. And let's give it some background. I was a strength and conditioning coach with the University of Michigan football team. So, I knew a lot about kind of the max hang type of approach where you lift a heavy weight. The idea is that if you want to get stronger, the theory in the field is that if you want to get stronger, you have to lift a heavy weight. And the reason that you have to lift a heavy weight is because you're going to get a neural adaptation. So your brain is going to tell the right muscles to work and to work really, really hard for a period of time. And you are getting an increase in muscle mass. And so those two things are the things that are really going into these kind of maximum force type of movements. And there's also this specificity rule, which is that if you want to get better at something, you have to practice that thing exactly. So for max hang, we're basically practicing what we're actually doing. So the test is max hangs, and one of the group is practicing at the test. And you should get better at the test if you practice the test. Whereas if you practice something that looks a little bit like it, but it's not the same force, it's not the same load, you wouldn't expect to see as big an improvement. So, we definitely thought that there was going to be a stepwise, that one was going to be much better than the other.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, when I just think about those four groups, my guess would be, yes, the group that just climbs, assuming they're not focusing their climbing on strength, like not doing like slow, super crimpy moonboard crawls or something. If they're like literally just kind of recreationally climbing, I would think that there'd be some improvement, but probably not much, almost flat. I would think the no-hang group would probably have some improvement, but then I think that would be bested by the group that does both no-hangs and max hangs. And then I would think that the group that heavily focused or was most focused on max hangs would probably see the most improvement because, to your point, that is the most specific, and it's also stimulating the system, if you will, or kind of the adaptations seem like they would be most directly correlated to doing those heavy lifts. So that would be my guess going in. But I guess we've probably strung this out far enough. Let's figure out. Let's learn from you what the results were. Then we can ask why.
Yeah. So go ahead, Emil.
Okay. Drum roll, please.
Drum roll. Yeah.
Now, I just want to give a little shout out here to PhysiVantage, the official climbing nutrition sponsor of The Struggle. I have been a paying customer of PhysiVantage for a couple of years now, and this stuff is truly the best of the best if you all want to level up your training and your performance, and I know you do. I'll give you a little window into my routine here. There are a few PhysiVantage products that I take every day, whether I climb or not. First, I start my day with their superfood greens, which taste delicious and is just the best way for me to get going in the morning. It supports my immune system and my digestive health. I just always feel like I'm good as long as I start my day with their greens. I also take their magnesium supplement every day, Mag ATP, which, as it turns out, and I didn't know this, a lot of people are deficient in, and among other things, it helps me to improve my sleep, which of course is really important for recovery. Lastly, I take their supercharged collagen every day as well to support my tendons and ligaments so that I can train harder and recover faster. It is all science-backed stuff. It tastes delicious, which I think is also very important. And I can also say with absolute sincerity that I'm training harder right now than I ever have before, and I have never felt better. And I attribute that a lot to PhysiVantage and how it's helping me to recover and perform my best. So if you're looking for that extra edge, hit the link in your podcast app or use checkout code STRUGGLE15 to save 15% off any full price nutrition order at fizzyvantage.com. I really think you're going to feel the difference. Check it out.
So basically, we didn't see much of an improvement from the people who just climbed.
Okay.
That was essentially negligible. However, from the no hang as well as the max hang, we saw a very similar strength improvement from both of these separately if you do either the no hangs or the max hangs.
Yeah, let me pause you there for a second, because that just doesn't, that's surprising to, that like kind of defies common sense. One was like just lightly loading fingers, like with their feet on the ground, you know, for 10 minutes a day. And another group was probably taking quite a bit of time to warm up and get ready and take caffeine and rip on that board as hard as they could. And ultimately, the improvements between test A and test B were negligible, Keith?
So there was no statistical difference between those people who did the no hangs versus those people who did the max hangs.
Wow.
So they're statistically indistinguishable. The effect size, which kind of is a measure of taking into account the variability, the number of individuals, the effect size is about 0.3, which is a moderate effect for the Abra-hangs, and about 0.45 for the max hangs, which is still a moderate effect. So they're actually, and that's just because more people were doing the max hangs. Mm-hmm. Because again, the people in the app who are going for finger strength, who are going to test multiple times, they're probably going to do a max hang much more than they're going to do an Abra-hang. So we had a lot more people in the max hang group. But that's why we get a little bit stronger effect size. But really, what it's telling us is that even though all of our kind of exercise physiology says that there's specificity, there's this neural component, there's this muscle component, all of those things are maximized by the max hangs, that there's not really a big difference between the two of them in this one measure that's actually very biased towards the max hang. So the max hangs themselves, the whole approach is actually biased to show that that's better. And what we show is that there's not really a statistical difference between the two types of loading. And so that's really interesting. And from my perspective as a physiologist, what it means is we'd always talked about there being a third component to strength. And that's what we call force transfer, the ability of me to take what the little proteins in my muscle are doing and transmit them to the bones so I can move, or so I can have that strength that I'm applying be transmitted so that I can actually produce movement, is actually truly a component of strength. Because what we're doing and what Emil has created using these, we call them the Abra-hang. So the no hang protocol. So right. In the Abra-hang protocol, basically what we're doing is we're focusing on force transfer. There's very little on the neural component because we're not really firing the muscle very hard. And there's very little on making the muscle bigger and stronger because we're not loading at a very high level. What we're doing is we're focusing on the connective tissue that's going to transmit that force. And so really what that's telling us is that we can do one thing, and the goal there is to improve force transfer. That's great. We do that. And then we can do the other thing, which is to improve the muscle and the nerves. Those both have about the same, maybe a little bit more in the muscle and nerve, but it's not really as big of a difference as we thought it would be.
It's mind blowing to be like, it's like almost hard for me to kind of like reconcile in my brain right now that the improvement one would get from point A to point B in their max hang test is statistically the same if you're doing these Abra-hangs. I love that term, the Abra-hangs. I'm sure you don't, Emil, but it's great. It's good stuff. That's good marketing. Let's go with it. Versus max hangs, because when you think about application, we'll get into this in a second. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but one is far less risky, far less taxing, takes less time. I mean, it's like, to your point, Emil, you can do it a couple times a day. It's just like the thing you do on a recovery day. And that's in effect, based on this research that you all pulled in this study, was having the same benefit statistically as doing the max hangs. So I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around it, but I love it. And I want to dive more into that and what that could mean for us as we program our own training going forward. But there's a fourth group that we haven't even touched on yet, Emil. So I'll hand it back to you. And that was the group that was doing both, right?
Yes, Dr. Ryan. Here comes the cherry on top. because we saw an additive effect of doing both, with an increasement of about 5.2% if you do both max-hangs and the Abra-hangs.
Yes, there we go. So that's significant, because that was, I don't know, is that 2x or something like that, Keith?
Yeah, it was basically, if you took the means of both of those groups and you added them up, you got it almost exactly what you got when you did them together.
Wow.
And again, that really speaks to us, to mechanism, that one is working on one thing, the max-hangs is doing one thing, the Abra-hangs are doing something else. When you put them together, they add up to exactly what you'd expect, given both individually.
Got it. Yeah. That makes sense. If I'm understanding what you just said correctly, so let me repeat it back to you in my own words and see if I'm following. The max-hangs were adding a couple percent by one mechanism. You were strengthening something, if you will. The Abra-hangs were adding a couple percent, the same, but not the same mechanism. It was the same improvement, but by doing something else. So it's like two different color bars on the bar chart. And when you did them both together, the one bar stacked on top of the other bar to effectively, like, it was accretive.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what it really tells us is that especially for strength, that working on these two separate things is going to have an additive effect. And so that's really good for us, because if your goal is to get stronger fingers and stronger grip, then we know that if you do two of these things, you're going to actually have an additive effect. If your goal is to improve health, well, we would hypothesize that one of those two mechanisms is going to be better than the other. So again, it then comes back to, as you're going forward as a climber, now what you can say is, look, one of the things that I've heard since I've started looking around in this area and reading more and more is what they always tell you is, if you're a beginner climber, well, you shouldn't do any hangboarding. You shouldn't do any finger-specific training early on. A lot of the reason that they tell you that is because the tissue is developing. And so if you're adding more load, you're going to have a greater likelihood of injury. Mm-hmm. Well, what this would suggest is, if the no-hangs, which again have a very low risk of injury, very low risk of fatigue, that might be really, really suitable for people who are new to climbing. So you can read into them, you can start making new hypotheses from this, just to make sure that everybody knows that we didn't do that the Abra-hangs folks weren't just novices who came in and did it. We actually got the grade of climber from Crimped, and they were all graded out. The average of each grade group was the same. It was about 20 on the grade system that they were using. So they're equivalent graded climbers, and they were actually pretty high quality climbers who were doing these protocols. And so that was really exciting for us, because it starts to then say, oh, what if we were to do this? And can we now add to novice climbers, can we now add something that's going to actually improve their climbing a lot more? And then it goes back to something that Emil and I talked about when he came and visited me when I was in Maastricht. The big effect that he saw is possibly because he's a boulderer more and he's doing much more dynamic work. And we do much more dynamic work. You're already getting a lot of the max hang type movement. You're doing a really forceful, really strong movement. You have to have muscle. You have to have the brain already working. Now, when you add the no-hangs, now your effect size is going to be much bigger, because you're adding it into something where you've already got that other load in. And so some of those things start to really suggest, okay, so if you are a really dynamic climber who's taking lots of chances and going for really big lows, that's somebody who's actually going to benefit probably even more from doing something like a no-hang, where it's going to be very slow, very low intensity, but a little bit longer duration holds that allow you to kind of fix any problems that you've developed within the tissue.
Wow. I'm just like, this is so rad. I mean, like, my mind's pretty blown here by what this, I think, means for a lot of us that are time strapped for our training, but also don't necessarily want to invite more high impact or heavy fatigue type of exercise into an already overloaded routine. I'm a sport climber. I do a lot of volume already, and but like no hangs for 10 minutes a day is more like recovery. In my mind, it's more of a kind of a recovery than an exercise. I'm curious, Emil, if you could expand now on, you've got this workout in Crimp. So anybody who has the Crimp app, which is free to download, but if you don't have it, like if you're just kind of going to do this, and could you sum it up in just, a few generalities, like what that 10 minutes looks like?
So free, I do it kind of, I feel my body out, so to speak. When I first tested it, I was using a scale to measure out how much force I was unloading from my body. And I tried to keep it strictly to 40% of my max load. So I'd measured that before, and then I compared it to when I was doing the protocol. I don't think that's necessarily something you have to do when performing the protocol. I think it's best to make sure you're in tune with your body and you're not overdoing it. Like it shouldn't feel like a strength session. Right. And now to get into what the session actually is it is 10 minutes of loading, but it's not 10 minutes of active loading. It's the first protocol I did was actually only 100 seconds of load during those 10 minutes. So I was doing 10 seconds of activity, of pulling with the first a 4-finger crimp, half crimp, for 10 seconds, and then resting for 50, and repeating that 3 times. And then I would switch up the grips. So I would do 3-finger drag, 2-finger drag, and 2-finger half crimp, alternating as I went along with the protocol. That's a very fast way of going through it, but that's basically the activity. I was trying to vary the grip types to make sure I was hitting as many markers as possible. I can't speak for if it's the best to change up which grip types you use. The physio I talked to in the last video I made about this, he recommended that to switch up the grip, but there's not too much data to support it aside from the fact that it seems to work.
Right.
So in the Crimp app, this protocol exists as well, but it's 200 seconds of activity. So you do 10 seconds on, 20 seconds off. And instead of doing 3 reps of the half crimp, you do 6 reps. So that's what
was tested, to be clear, yes. Right? So yes. the results that you got in this kind of data mining of crimped users were people who were using that protocol that you just spoke of in the Crimp app.
Correct. That is correct.
Okay. So Keith, because as you said, the cells don't know, right? I mean, it's like a signal situation. So it's the first 10 minutes, they're kind of paying attention, and then they're not really paying attention all that much. Is there any thought or theory behind hanging at 10% instead of 40% and just not letting go, just like sitting there for 10 minutes rather than the load and release? Or does the connective tissue work in a way where load and release maybe indicates a more efficacy?
Yeah, so we do think that the load and release is important. One of the key things about the way that the Abra-hangs work is that it's a longer duration load. So you don't want to go, you don't have to go for 10 minutes on a single hold. What we're looking to do, so all of our tendons are what are called viscoelastic. What that means is that they've got liquid within them, and they're elastic. And the collagen provides the elasticity. Water is the liquid. And so when you hold, what happens when you're doing sport climbing, you're going really quickly, or when Emil is doing something, he's got a very high load and he's got to catch. That is really fast for a really short period of time. And with a viscoelastic material, that means the material's really, really stiff when that happens. Okay. As I hold it, and everybody knows this because if you try and touch your toes, or if you're just hanging on a hangboard and your feet are off the ground, if you start with your feet off the ground, after about 20 seconds, suddenly your feet are on the ground. You're like, whoa, wait a second, how did that happen? Well, all of these tissues, as we hold on to something, or as we try and hold our position on a wall sit or whatever, the tendons actually relax, and they go through this process of stress relaxation. Okay, and that means that we can either go further, or it takes us less tension in order to hold that position. That's really important for our tendons to get a signal. So we've done more work on our little models, and what we can show is if we do the exact same number of loads dynamically, so we go back and forth once a second, like we're walking or we're running, or we do the exact same time under tension, but we do it as an isometric hold, where we hold it for 30 seconds. We actually see that the isometric hold, you get much more signal than the dynamic hold. And over time, the tendon actually becomes stronger and has more collagen if you do the isometric versus the dynamic. The reason for that is as we go through that little relaxation, as I'm holding that and my tendons are actually relaxing, what happens is at the beginning, only if I'm going to do a short load, like Emil's going to jump up for a ledge and he's going to catch that ledge, that immediately what's going to happen is all the load is going to go through the strongest and only the strongest part of his tendons. As he holds it for longer and longer, more of that load is actually going through weaker and weaker parts of the tendon. Mm-hmm. And that's really important because a lot of the signal that we're going to get is coming from the cells in the weakest part. But they don't see the load when you only do fast stuff.
Right.
When we only hold for a split second or 1-2 seconds, the strongest part, the cells within the strongest part are going to get a signal, but the cells within the weakest part don't. And that's also why once you get, and the first time I'd ever heard the term tweaky fingers was talking to Emil and hearing his brother. That's because you've got a small bit of damage there. If you've got a small bit of damage in your tendon, what's going to happen is every time I load quickly, there's no load that goes through that. And so I'll never fix a tweaky tendon with fast dynamic loading. Mm-hmm. So in our work with the NBA, with jumper's knee, we're able to fix holes in tendons by holding those holds even longer, maybe up to 30 seconds, because that's where the stress relaxation kind of becomes maximum. So if I have somebody who's got an injured finger or an injured pulley or an injured tendon, I'm going to hold those holds for longer. But if I've got healthy tissues, I can hold those shorter. The way that the Abra-hangs protocol is working now. And so that's really what we're trying to do is we're trying to just get the signal to as many of the cells within the tissue as possible, not just the cells that are within the strongest part, but we also need to get that signal into the weaker parts. And just like you can imagine, as if you've seen Emil's video about going to the strongest grip in the world competition, those big dudes, they're able to hold a lot more than he can, but he's got a way better endurance for a lot of those things where he's holding on to stuff.
Right.
That's again, they're twice his size, but they're going to fatigue a lot faster. So it's the same kind of thing within the cells within our tendons. There's going to be the big, strong stuff that fatigues really quickly, and then there's going to be the smaller, not necessarily as big, but those are going to fatigue less quickly. And so what happens when we do these 10 seconds, 20-second holds? What we're doing is we're getting that signal more continuous or more completely to all the cells within the tendons. So all the cells respond and the whole tendon gets stronger. And that's the difference between the max and the Abra-hangs, is that now we're going for that longer period and we're letting the cells within the weaker part of the tissue get the signal so that they actually make that part of the tendon stronger as well.
Well, I really appreciate the clarity of that explanation on kind of the physiology, how that works. That makes perfect sense to me. And also, again, underpins that theory or the results rather that you got that showed that when doing both the max hangs as well as the Abra-hangs, that's where most of the benefit was realized. Emil, was there a sense when you came out of getting these results on the ratio of the programming, how many of the no hangs to do in a week versus how many max hangs to do in a week? Any results that came from that, or theories at least?
Not necessarily. I feel like that's one of the things you have to program for yourself and see what works. Some people can do max hangs almost daily and don't seem to get broken from it. If I tried to do max hangs daily, I would implode. So it very much depends on who you are and your training history and also how your basic physiology works, kind of. I would argue that the Abra-hangs you can probably do on a daily basis with no issue. But I also think that comes back to the load you put into your system. If you do them too heavy, then I don't think it's great. If you accidentally do 70% of your max, then you're probably going to get injured. So yeah, you need to make sure the load is kept at a sustainable rate.
Right. And Keith, does that ring true for you as well as you were looking back, just in terms of no hangs likely safe for most people to do very frequently? Max hangs, obviously, to Emil's point, it's going to be kind of case specific, but most of us would not do max hangs more than a couple of days a week, I don't think.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what we think is ideal. We can't, from the retrospective study, we can't tell you exactly how many times to do one or the other, but that's why we're looking in the future to do prospective studies. So we've got going through our ethics board here to actually get a prospective prospective study where we're going to recruit people. They're going to get randomized into different groups. They're going to train that way for 30 days. We're going to measure. And then we're going to be able to start making decisions based on frequency, based on length of the holds, based on a whole bunch of other things. And most importantly, we're also going to be able to ask questions about what's your tweakiness? How have we improved function with one of these over the other? And I think that that's where we're really going to see the big difference between the different protocols. And this is what we see across a lot of different sports. When we do longer holds, it's great for health, not necessarily as high, not necessarily as important for performance. For performance, we want to be somewhat stiff because as our tendons are stiffer, we can transmit the force quicker and we've got better rate of force development. We can go faster. But as we do that, we're going to have much more likelihood of injury because as you go faster, our tissues are stiffer because they're viscoelastic, and that means they store more energy. And that means also because they're developing the force or stiffness faster, they'll actually break at a shorter length. That's what part of this is. So you know that if you're walking down, and Davis, we've got like hot yoga downtown. If I walk past the hot yoga place and there's somebody with their foot behind their head, I know that they got there not by moving their foot up there as fast as possible. I know that they moved into that position very slowly in a controlled way because that tissue was a lot less stiff when they did that. And so what we're seeing with a lot of what we see as far as the tendon component of this is that we know from the work that we've been doing before and from what we see with the Abra-hangs that the load isn't really the most important thing. And I think that that's really an important part of what Emil just said is what the instruction on the app is you should just feel a little bit of tension across the muscle. That's about it. You should feel tension across the system. What we're hoping to do when we do the prospective study is get people from all over the world to go through the app to be able to do it. But we're hoping also to recruit a bunch of people here in Davis where we can actually quantify, put them on top of a scale, have them take their bathroom scale, and let's just see, okay, here's your body weight. What percentage of body weight are you going to do your no hangs at? Let's do it at, say, 40%, 60%, or even 20%. Let's see if there's differences between how much load we put on them. From what our data would say, I don't think there's going to be a big difference between it. And that's why what's most likely to happen with people who do the Abra-hangs is that they're probably going to try and overdo it. They think they have to work harder because for everything that we've been told about sport performance, no pain, no gain, you have to go hard. That's not really what we're finding out. We're finding out that actually the pain is actually there for a reason. And so we can go at a much lower level and we can have these positive effects. And that's especially true for people who are tweaking their fingers or going through something and actually getting a problem. What I would say is we can start loading that the next day and just do it at a very low intensity where we're doing it at, say, a 20% of body weight hang, but we're just putting a little tiny bit of load through there. The pain should be below a 2 out of 10. But if you can do below 2 out of 10 on a tendon that you've tweaked, just enough tension so that you can feel it through there, now hold it for a while. That's actually going to accelerate the rate at which you can get back to full-on climbing because it's going to heal that tissue much, much quicker.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think if I'm understanding correctly, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if for those of us who are going to embark on the Abra-hangs in the crimped app or just on our own, is it better to err to the side of going lighter? If you've got this 40% idea in your mind, but yes, we're a masochistic bunch here as climbers. We want to try to push ourselves a little bit harder every time. In this case, we want to err to the lighter than 40% side than the heavier than 40% side, if I'm understanding correctly.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. My dog is snoring at my feet right here. I got to wake him up for a second. He's going to bone my audio. Wake up, Ringo. He will not. It's a rainy day here in Kentucky, and he just wants to snore at my feet. Man, this is so cool. Well, I think we can probably wrap it up in just a second here because the takeaways are so clear that for those who are not doing anything, And if you don't want to add max hangs because you're averse to that, you don't want to risk injury, or maybe you're just not that psyched on climbing, whatever it is, you could throw some of these no hangs in there and you're going to see a benefit. That was a clear result. For those who are doing max hangs only, you know that you've got more that you can pull out of your results by adding the no hangs. And for those who are just doing the no hangs, it's clear also that by adding some max hangs, you're going to be able to get some benefits. So the steps that one can take there are quite clear, and it's really exciting.
One thing that I wanted to come back on is something that Chet had mentioned earlier, is that he tries to do like 6 hours between his training and his hangboarding. The reason that he's trying to do that is because, like he said, it's 10 minutes to get the maximal signal. But then if I give another stimulus to the tissue, if I load it again, 2 hours later, I actually don't get that same increase in signal that I did from the first 10 minutes. And it takes me about 6 to 8 hours in order to get that full signal strength back. And that's why if you're going to do this twice a day, we suggest doing it separated by 6 to 8 hours difference. So if you're going to go out climbing in the afternoon, just like Emil does, you want to get up early and do that as part of a morning routine. It's going to be 6 hours before you go out and you do your climbing, your main climbing. If you can't do 6 hours, that's okay, but that's the ideal situation. So if you got people who've damaged something and they're trying to do their comeback, and basically what they would do is they would go morning, evening, have maybe 8 hours between them, and those are the 2 sessions. So that's the ideal situation for the connective tissue adaptation.
I'm psyched for the 2.0 study that you're going to be doing where you'll actually be able to control some of these factors, but it seems quite compelling based on the amount of data you were able to pull from crimped. So thanks for putting in the work on that, and so that the rest of us climbers can benefit from it. Emil, any wrap up, any parting words, anything that surprised you or that you're taking away from the results of this that you're now implementing into your routine?
I would say I feel a lot more comfortable adding in max hangs than I did before to the actual protocol. I was probably a little bit restrictive with that before, just because I was on a hangboard more than what felt like it made sense. But in retrospect, well, now I feel like I'd be comfortable doing my max hangs as much as I feel like doing them. However, I would say generally I do prefer just keeping it to getting my strength training from the actual climbing. So being on a woody or a spray wall of some sort, it does work for me. It works a little bit better for me, but I think that's a very personal thing. So people will find their own way with that type of training. I know some people prefer max hangs for finger strength gains, and some people prefer board climbing, and you have all of these things you can do.
Right.
So yeah, that was my takeaway, that I do feel more comfortable loading my fingers harder despite doing the protocol already.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Keith, how about for you? You spend a lot of time. There's nothing that climbers like to do more, as I'm sure you've discovered, is to just think and obsess over our fingers, over these little. We fall and we immediately look at our hands. Climbers spend more time looking at their frickin' fingers than probably anything else that we do. And this has been really exciting and really encouraging outcomes from this study here. But as further dive into this crazy world of climbing, where do you see this going, or is there anything else that came out of this current study in terms of its application for us climbers that you'd like to share here?
Yes, I think the key for us is again, it's the idea that there's even more than just a health component to what these longer, low intensity, long duration isometrics have. So we know that these low intensity, long duration isometrics have been really good for fixing tendons around the body. In this case, we think that they're improving the size and the strength of the finger tendons and the pulleys within the hand. What I think people are going to find is the more intense, the more tweaky their hands are, the more the Abra-hangs are going to actually really help them improve or help them stay climbing. Because basically what we see with all the athletes that we work with is that the reason that they come to us is because they aren't able to do the sport that they love. And so what we've found is that these low intensity, long duration holds are absolutely fundamental to kind of that health span, or that span of being able to do the sport you love. And so the more intensely people are going, at their walls and climbing And the more impact and the more tweaky their fingers are, the more impactful the Abra-hangs are going to be. And again, that's going to be one of the core things that most climbers are going to find is that as their intensity goes up, if they can maintain the Abra-hangs, that's going to help them progress much faster. And I think that that's going to be a key moving forward. And one of the big things that we want to do with the group that we're hoping to recruit here at Davis is actually measure the size of the finger tendons and the size of the pulleys so that we can actually see whether what we're hypothesizing is that the tendons are getting bigger and stronger. We actually want to actually see that. And I think that that's going to be really exciting when we get a chance to look to say, are they bigger and stronger? And if they aren't, then what's happening? But if they are, then that's really speaking to how this whole process is working.
So great. I love that. Thank you so much. Emil, you got to get Keith out on some boulders, man.
One day I will. That's for sure.
Yeah. Or I don't know, Keith, you might need to get Emil in a lab. You get him fitted for a lab coat.
We've already had him in a lab, so he's already been wearing a lab coat. So that's good. It's good. And I'm sure that Natalie, my PhD student, is going to get me out to climb.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Dr. Baar and Dr. Abrahamsson, thank you so much for bringing this study to us. Where can we see this study? Is it still under review, or when's it going to be out and available?
I think the best answer to this is I will send you all the information so you can put it in the show notes, because currently there's no good way to reference it at the present time, but it will by the time this podcast is released.
That's great. And you're also going to be doing a video or a series of videos about all of this as well that we should be able to link to, I'm hoping?
Correct. Yeah, I have one video that's currently in production, a very exciting one, but it is very much a summary of what we talked about here.
Cool.
It's we're in second review. So what that means is that one of the reviewers is still looking for extra stuff. So two of the reviewers are happy. The third reviewer wants a little bit more, and it's improved the paper quite nicely. We've done the effect sizes that they wanted. We've basically answered all their questions. So we'll resubmit it in the next couple of days here, and then hopefully they'll be satisfied with it. But if not, we'll go through another round of revisions. And that's the problem with the science component, is that it does take time. And that's why what Emil's been doing has been great, because normally it takes about 15 years between making a discovery in a lab and people actually learning about it and applying it into their real life. Mm-hmm. And one of the great things that Emil's done is popularized a lot of the science at a much earlier stage than we would expect. So normally people wouldn't be kind of curious about a paper that's in second revision because they wouldn't really learn about it. But because he's been so good at popularizing what's been going on, now people are anxious to see it. But it will be out very shortly. So
yeah, we appreciate it. And yeah, certainly by the time this podcast comes out, I think those resources will be available and we'll link to them. And yeah, Dr. Baar, what you're going through in climbing vernacular is projecting. So, you try something, there's some pushback, you got to try again, and there's a little pushback and, a little more progress. You're just getting some links. And at some point in time, you're going to top out this paper and we'll all get our hands on it. And Emil, we'll keep an eye out for your video as well. And thanks for doing this, man. I mean, what a wild adventure it's been since you put up that video. And it's been a lot of work, I'm assuming, on your part, and obviously Keith and your team as well over there, but such a value to the climbing community. So thank you both for doing it and for talking us through it today here.
Yeah, I just want to intervene real quick and give a massive thank you to the people who has helped out with this, because both Keith, Natalie, Peter, and my brother, I mean, I'm just a dumbo in the middle who accidentally posted it to the world, but they're the real, they're doing so much for us all. And I, as a climber personally, am just so excited for all the effort that they put in, and so grateful. So I definitely want the credit to go where it's deserved, and that is to all the people behind the paper.
All right, that wraps things up here with Crusher Emil Abrahamsson and Dr. Keith Baar diving into the science for us rock climbers. And I got to tell you, it's not often where I come out of a conversation and I'm like, oh yeah, that 10 minutes a day could change the game for me. But I really feel like the data is clear from this study that they did in the paper, and I'm very excited for the studies that they're going to dive into in the future. But man, I've since recording this interview, so this was probably a month ago where we recorded this, I've added the Abra-hangs into my daily routine. I just open up my Crimped app. They're right in there. It's a follow along. Takes about 10 minutes. And I'll do those in the morning and then also at night, like when my kid's in the bath, or just, if I'm like watching some TV, I've got my little like bathroom doorway, just like the top of the door, there's the trim that goes around it. And because you're only hanging lightly, I don't feel like I'm going to rip the trim off. And so like, I'll just be like watching some TV and I'll do these hangs, follow along on the app. And my fingers have felt great. I trust the data that they talked about in this conversation here. And so without adding any additional heavy load, it's very clear that not only am I going to be taking care of my connective tissue, but also quite likely stacking on some extra gains onto the max hangs. I haven't retested my max hangs yet since doing this. I'll probably give it another month or so, and I'm really excited to see how that goes. I will update you on what those results were in one of my monthly training plogs. That's a podcast log, a blog for a podcast. Still not sure if it's a word, but just making it a word. And so if you are an Apple subscriber or a patron of the show, you can access my monthly plogs along with all sorts of other bonus content, from ad-free episodes to pro clinics on so many topics that will help you level up as a climber, to bonus episodes with the best athletes in the world. So yeah, if you've got a few bucks and you want to support me, I'd really appreciate it. If you don't have a few bucks, there's a free trial. You can pop over to patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show to get a 7-day free trial, and you can dip into all that great stuff and then cancel if you don't think it's worth it. Or again, if you got the means, man, I'd really appreciate your support as I'm cranking away for you here out in the podcast/utility closet. Thank y'all so much for listening. I hope your training and your climbing are going great. And if you're struggling like me, well, just remember that the struggle makes us stronger.